Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I have a video that I am really excited about. I'm excited about the concept that just kind of like, uh-oh, windshield wipers. It snowed, and of course we're back for another car video. Anyway, this video idea came to me with the latest book that I read that I absolutely fell in love with. It was The Right Move by Liz Tom Ford. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the idea for this video came from that book because I fell so hard for this author's writing that I was like, it would be really fun to do a video where I talk about authors that I fell in love with their books, like at first sight. Like from the moment I started reading this book, I just knew this author was going to be a favorite of mine. So this is a collaboration video with Caitlin from The Love Librarian, Justin from Justin Reads Romance, Lizelle, and Chandler-Ainsley. I asked all of them to do this video with me because they were all such a huge reason why I even picked up the Liz Tom Ford book in the first place, and I just thought it would be really fun to have more points of view on this concept. So let's go ahead and get into my favorite authors that I fell in love with at first sight. So of course I'm going to talk about the first author and the reason that I even thought about this video, and that is Liz Tom Ford. I can't even tell you how long it's been since I have found an author who immediately works for me on every single level. I love and adore the way that this woman builds her characters, the way that she paces her books. I love so much the way she builds her romances, where they're so much built on chemistry but also mutual connection, and the way she keeps sexual tension so high throughout the entire book, even if they, you know, are together early on in the book, which I am currently reading Mile High by this author and absolutely loving it. I'll have a review for that soon, but she's doing the same thing in that book. I love her romances. I love her heroes who are always so completely out of their mind, gone for the heroine. Like, they are down bad for their woman, and do we want anything else, really? We love to see a man completely out of his head in love with the woman, and that is how she writes her heroes. I also really love how she writes her heroines to be very complex and very strong, but also to have vulnerabilities that they're not afraid to confront or to talk about with the hero. I think she does such a great job of really convincing you with small tiny details that these two are real people and that they love each other. I love so much watching the way she builds her romances and how it grows, and how I am completely on board with every single moment, every single interaction. She fills her books with the things that I love most, which are very small tiny gestures, like the brush of a hand, the way he notices how she looks. It's just so absolutely beautiful. I love her book so much. I'm a huge fan. At this point, I've only read 1.5 books, and I'm not saying that all of the authors on this list are all 5-star reads for me, but there was something about these authors that from the moment I started reading, I was like, yep, this is exactly my brand of author. This is exactly what I've been wanting and what I've been missing. So Liz Tom Ford is a new favorite of mine, and I'm going to read everything that she writes because I think she is an incredible talent, and I just love her books and her style of writing and her characters and her heroes, and it just like makes me swoon. I just love her books so much, and I haven't felt like that in a long time, so I love her. Okay, the next author on here that was definitely one that deeply impressed me is Carissa Broadbent. I read Daughter of No Worlds, I believe in October or November. I read it in the fall. I think it was October because it was in my November wrap-up. And, you know, I love fantasy romance. I love fantasy books. I really love fantasy romance that is well written, that is really convincing in the fantasy world and the romance, and that's so hard to find. And I particularly am a fan of a really thought out, well-developed fantasy world and character development. So I was so surprised, honestly, when I picked up Daughter of No Worlds, and I felt like it had every single element that I was wanting. It had a really slow build relationship that was based upon character development and a friendship that was building in this mentor-mentee type of relationship. I think that Carissa Broadbent is extremely clever and thoughtful with how she builds her fantasy worlds. She always allows for things to happen in further books, but she sets it up in the first book really well. I mean, I think you can tell so clearly that she has put a lot of time and energy into developing this world. She's got it thought out. It's not anything that is hastily put together or that relies on some type of like high heat sexual component, which Those I absolutely hate because they show no thought. They really don't. It's just literally, how can we put these two together so they can bang? And I could not be more bored with that scenario. So Carissa Broadbent is a very thoughtful writer. She's also really, really great at using moments in her fantasy books that show this evolution in the characters' relationship, that show a vulnerability because they have this shared experience in the fantasy world. And that's like a sort of mini trope that I really, really love, when the hero and heroine are doing something, they're maybe trying to escape or survive, or they're on a quest, or something about the fantasy plot is something that motivated these two to share vulnerabilities, or to come together, or to feel something about each other that they would not have been able to if that fantasy element hadn't been there. And that's something that I think appears easy when we read it, but I think it takes a lot of planning, preparation, and thought to get that to work on both of those levels, and I'm just so impressed. I'm so impressed. I think she has such a great grasp for building characters that are deeply human and flawed, but that you love. You love them for their flaws, you love them for their triumphs, you love everything about them, so that even when something else she does, this is just going to be a gush fest, basically. This author does something that is very rare, where she gets you on board with the villains. She gets you to feel so much empathy for them that you're questioning, are they actually a villain? You see their side, you see their point of view, you see what they're fighting for and what they're trying to do, to the point where you are like, I love these people, and I know they are opposing or fighting the other people that I love, but I mean, I could be on either side, and I think that's just incredible character work and thoughtful plot building. Okay, so now this next author is another one that from the moment I read her books, I was like, wow, this author is talented, and that is J.L. Seegers. The first book I read from her was Restore Me, which I have talked about at length in so many videos. I have gushed about it, and I'm never going to stop because I think she is an incredible talent, and I really, truly love how she builds her romances to create a very soul level type of connection. I love how she puts in her books heartache, real life situational heartache, that I can feel empathy for because maybe I've experienced something similar, or I can relate to those feelings. I think that she has such a good grasp on how to build relationships that feel real. I think her books are very mature. I love how she writes her heroes. Her heroes absolutely, again, 100% worship the heroine. They worship these women so bad. They are so down bad for them. They are gone for them. They will do anything, literally. And I just can never get enough of a man like that because it's just such a beautiful thing to see. And I think it's especially impactful in J.L. Seegers' work because she takes you through so much of the heroine's point of view. So you're seeing all of the struggles and the tragedies and the sorrows that she's experienced. And then you see this man who loves her despite all of that, or maybe because of all of that. And all he wants to do is basically like wipe her tears and love her and give her the care that she deserves. And it just brings me to tears almost as I'm talking about it. I think her books are so deeply emotional. They are very hot. Like she puts a lot of steam in her books, which usually I'm not a fan of. But I just love, love, love how she writes about love. I think she's an author who writes about love and not just smut, even though her books are also very high heat. Okay, so now this next author was one that I thought I was gonna love, but I wasn't really sure how much I would love them until I read Desire in His Blood by Zoe Draven. This was my first book I've read from this author, and I was immediately a fan. I think that this author is incredible. She does such a good job. She's very, very similar to other fantasy romance authors that I love, who does a pretty good job. It's not as in-depth or as, well built, but it's very well thought out. I think her sci-fi worlds are very well thought out, and it really has a huge connection and an impact on how this couple ended up together, how their romance is developing. She does the same thing that Carissa Broadbent does, where she puts her characters in fantastical situations that are key to them developing their romantic feelings and relationships. And I just love how she writes chemistry. I love how she writes her heroes. This hero specifically, I would call an alpha mellow, but for most of the book, he's very much an alpha. But when he finally falls for her, he is just completely a cinnamon roll for her. I love the way that this is still the only book I've read from her because I loved it so much. I'm a little nervous, but I have her Horde King series ready to go when I'm in the mood for it. But I think she's a very clever writer. She has really great dialogue. She has such a good grasp of getting you invested in the characters' lives right away without providing you a lot of exposition or backstory, which is unnecessary and which can put you at a distance. And I think that's a go-to for a lot of writers when they are trying to get you invested in the character. Something they'll do is give you a lot of backstory or a lot of internal monologue or a lot of just exposition, and you don't need all of that. What you need is some example of how this person lives and how they are interacting with other people, and that is the key to getting you to feel empathy and connection with this person through an action in their life or even through a memory. That would work too. So I think this author does a really good job of creating connection and sexual tension. I love that so much, and I feel like I'm not getting enough of it these days. It's just, you know, this author does sexual tension really, really well, and I love it so much. Okay, now we have a historical author for you, and this is Kerrigan Byrne. Kerrigan Byrne was one of the first authors that I read when I was coming back to historical romance. I hadn't read it in several years, and I had heard everybody talking about the Highwaymen, and specifically Jess from Peace Love Books. This was before COVID even happened. I was like, okay, I'm ready. I am ready to get back into this world. The Highwaymen was the first book I picked up, and let me just tell you, I was immediately impressed with this author's writing. And to this day, I've remained such a huge fan of all of her books. I think she's an incredible writer. She handles dark elements and heavy themes in such a way that they never feel overwhelmingly dark or overwhelmingly heavy. She again writes that soulmate level connection so well. She has very unique characters and heroes who I think can be a little bit hard to love, but it's their love for the heroine that really wins you over, even though sometimes they fight it, sometimes they're a bit alpha, sometimes they're a bit hard to love, very damaged. She handles all of those with so much care, nuance, and attention to detail without ever bogging you down with details. She has the balance of just enough to give you to get you to feel things, and I love that so much. I think she, you know, I mean, all of the authors on here that write romance, there's one author on here who isn't a romance author, although she has written romantic books. All of these authors who write romance are on here because they created that feeling of chemistry, attraction, connection that goes beyond just, that's a hot person and I'm horny. Like, I cannot tell you how many books like that I have read. And I think that when we're talking about what allows authors to really create that feeling of connection between these two, I think that a lot of it comes down to small little details and editing out things that aren't necessary and not going too hard. And I think Kerrigan Byrne, for being a very dramatic author, she has such a good grasp on this, on how to really convey that sense of connection, attraction, you know, two souls who find each other. And I love her books so much. They're deeply romantic, and I will be a fan of hers for life. So impressed with her, and I was from the minute I picked up her book. Okay, so now this author is another one that I was really not sure how I was going to feel about this, because she does deal with some topics that typically I stay away from. She writes quite a lot. Well, I've read two of hers that have pretty extreme age gaps, and the one that really won me over, and actually was the first book I read from her, was Torn, and this is Carrie Ann Cole. Carrie Ann Cole, I think, is a very sensitive writer. I think that she knows exactly how to balance trauma and dark elements in a way that don't ever feel just like she's throwing all of the kitchen sink at you. She's not just trying to overwhelm you with traumatic things or dramatic things. Like, there's nothing really about most of her books that I've read that feel like she's trying to just get a shocking reaction out of you. She's really doing a lot of groundwork to make each scenario and each element feel believable and real and true to the characters. And she does that also by showing you the impact that has on the characters in a way that doesn't ever feel like overdone. I think she has a good grasp on how to like rein that in and not go too hard, and I think a lot of newer authors really struggle with that. Carrie Ann Cole, I think, has a really great balance on convincing you that this is a traumatic situation, and because these characters are in this traumatic situation, how might they develop romantic feelings for each other? And she does that in a way that has me completely buying in and believing it. I think that she also has a really good way of writing her heroes that I really love, where they are sensitive men, and they are very, you know, willing to do whatever it takes to win the heroine, and I just love it so much. So she's an author that I particularly like because of how sensitive she is with the subjects that she handles, and also I just really like her prose and her writing. I think it's, in most of the time for me, it's a pretty invisible form of prose, but she also knows how to put some really beautiful words together with sentences and phrases and passages that will stick with you. Okay, so now this next author is Tori Jean. Tori Jean's debut book, Finding Jean Kelly, is largely about the heroine's journey with endometriosis. And this was the first book I'd read from her, and truthfully, I was a little wary. I did get an arc of this book, and I was so nervous to read this book because it deals with a subject that is very dear to me, that is also potentially triggering for me. But I also really was nervous about, I always get nervous about trying a debut author specifically with an arc, because there's always a chance that I'm not gonna like it, and I don't want to be that person who's like, hey, I'm not gonna review your book because I didn't like it, or no, it's a 2-star, you know? So I was so happy, so pleasantly surprised that Tori Jean's writing is so charming. It's so witty. She does put a little bit of quirkiness into her heroines, but again, I think she reaches that balance really well, where they can be a little bit quirky, but not too much. Like, she has a good grasp on keeping her character really well developed and well rounded, and making her a little bit unique and different, but without it ever feeling tropey or too much, you know? I think that she has a good use of humor. I also feel like she writes a hero who absolutely worships the heroine, which I just, you know, if a writer is gonna make a hero like that, I'm probably gonna like their books, okay? I just really, really like how she does that. I also love how she handles internal dialogue of her characters. So Evie is the heroine who struggles with endometriosis, and we do get to see a lot of her inner struggle with that disease and how it affects her everyday life. And I think that a lot of times authors have a tendency, when you're in their character's head, to let all of that sorrow sort of weigh down the character and bog them down, and it feels like you're in their head and they're not having a good time. I think Tori Jean handles the internal dialogue, internal monologue of the heroine specifically really, really well, because while she is acknowledging how she feels and fears she has and struggles she's having, she's also talking about or thinking about a recipe she's going to make, or something that somebody did for her or her friend, and it's just a really good balance. So I think Tori Jean's prose is very sharp, it's very clever, and she also has a really good balance on writing characters that feel real and feel unique, and building a romance that is so swoony, and a hero that just will do anything for the heroine. So I really like her books a lot. So now this last author is not a romance author. She writes in a variety of genres, and that is T. Kingfisher. I've read several of her books, but the first book of hers that I read that really wowed me was What Moves the Dead. This is a little horror novella based on The House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. And I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan. I love The House of Usher. I think it's a deeply unsettling short story. And I was so impressed with this little novella by T. Kingfisher. I felt like it was so charming at times, and it was kind of a little surprising how charming and funny and cozy it felt at times, while being right up against these horrific elements and that horror feeling when you're reading a horror book and you're just like, something unsettling is happening. I don't know what is going to happen to these characters. I feel really uncomfortable. And also, she had a lot of horrific imagery about, like, the rabbits' bodies, their reanimated corpses, and it was just such a great blend for me. I was just so surprised and impressed with how she managed to have this story be charming and cozy, but at the same time horrifying and unsettling. And I was just like, wow, I am very impressed with this author. So I really love her writing, and I want to read more from her. At this point, I've only read 3 of her books, but I've been deeply impressed with each one. So, okay. There you have it. I spent way more time talking about these authors than I had planned, but I just love these authors so much. All of them mean a lot to me, and everybody on this list is an author where from the moment I picked up the first book by them, I was like, this author is something special. So thank you so much for making it this far. If you have, if you want to leave me an emoji, please leave me your favorite book emoji, and be sure to check out Caitlin and Jessen's video, and I'll see y'all in my next one.